By now, y'all probably know that I like my MacBook. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Apple's a perfect company and that macOS is the ideal operating system or any of this. If you want proof, check out my other channel, Theo Rants, where I regularly break down Apple's worst decisions, especially around the App Store. I'm not fond of the way they run that. Before we go any further, I do need to do some disclosures. I'm invested in Apple, so you have to account for bias there, but I'm also invested in Microsoft and Google and Amazon, all of which will be relevant here. So while my investment in Apple might make me biased, again, check out the videos on Theo Rants if you want to see that I don't necessarily let my investments bias me too much. Anyways, that all said, I honestly can't imagine doing my work, be it code, running my business, making videos, and all these other things on any computer other than my trusty MacBook right here. And my path here was kind of strange because whether or not you believe it, I used to be a die-hard Linux guy. Like, I rocked a ThinkPad with Arch and i3 for a while, and it was really fun. But as you know, I didn't stick with it. I did eventually bounce to this beautiful MacBook with the beautiful Outer Wild sticker in front. And I want to talk a bit about why, because I've never really broken down my path from Linux to my Mac. So let's talk about why I moved to Mac. The first important thing to realize is when I started my move to Mac. When I was in high school, I was absolutely a PC guy. I was building my own computers. I dreamed of writing for Linus Tech Tips. I even had a kind of cringy tech review blog. I got one of the first 240 gig SSDs from Kingston right when it released because I went to, PAX East and convinced them that I was legit enough to be worth sending something to for a review sample. And it blew me away. It was so cool. But I was deep on the PC building scene. It was my shit. I want to make sure y'all believe me when I say I used to be a PC person, so I dug through the old Facebook to prove it. This is a very Android photo because I was a very Android person. Some of the others are a little more high quality, but this was my setup for a while. That HP laptop right there, I learned about Linux both because my high school had a Linux club that I got part of as a freshman, even though it was all seniors. Owe them for everything. Yes, that was a Beatles poster. But also, you can see my little Android statue there. My principal in high school gave that to me because I helped him ROM his Android phone. Yes, my high school principal would call me out of class to go to the principal's office to help him install new custom ROMs on his phone. I've been a nerd since fucking elementary school, but that type of deep since high school. And this HP laptop carried me through so much shit. It's insane. God, that computer. The reason I'm a bit of a Vista apologist, yes, I can defend Vista, not because it was good, but because it was the first shock to the system of computer manufacturers that they couldn't keep coasting on 256 gigs of RAM anymore. 256 megs, not even gigs, megs. Yeah. The 256 meg cap for memory that every manufacturer effectively was operating with was insane. And if it wasn't for Vista, we might have never really normalized reasonable amounts of memory. But Vista demanded so much more that manufacturers actually started improving their hardware for the first time in so goddamn long. So even though this laptop was a piece of shit, and it was absolutely a piece of shit, it had 3 gigs of RAM, which was very handy because I ended up using it to host servers after I stopped using it as my main computer. But man, I would play World of Warcraft with that thing flipped upside down, battery removed, and a desk fan blowing air directly on it. Before I had snagged the Sony monitor, I don't remember how I got that. Oh, it wasn't the Sony. I got this one on sale when I worked at Staples. It's a 1600-900 cheap ass display I got for $70. Before then, I was using a goddamn CRT. And yeah, the printer under the desk was nasty. I'm not saying the setup was good. I'm saying it's how I functioned. It was the best I could do in high school at the time with this crappy old wired keyboard and the $70 mouse and the free keyboard. You used what you could, okay? But I made it work. The more interesting thing, though, is obviously I was dual booting all of these with Linux. This computer at this point was just a Minecraft server running a headless Ubuntu at that point. But I would use Windows as my main OS for gaming, and when I wanted to get any real work done, would immediately reboot to Linux. There is an important detail here, which is I did a lot of photoshopping. There isn't much proof of that here, but I would make graphics and fuck with my friends' pictures and things all of the time. So I did end up in Windows a decent bit just to do Photoshop type stuff. But I was in Windows for that and for games, and then everything else I did in Linux. Primarily still Ubuntu, I'll admit, but I was deep in the Ubuntu world, running my own DEs and shit. It was a good time. But then I tried something interesting. Okay, this wasn't the interesting thing. This was me rocking the Asus Transformer. That fucking tablet was awful. Since I was building my own machines, I ended up discovering this wonderful thing called hackintoshing. If you're not familiar with hackintoshing, it's the concept of taking a PC and running macOS on it. It was real fun. It was real fun. The fact that I could just like build an Intel PC and then install macOS on it was just like, I'm not supposed to be able to do that. And I abused it. I was actually selling these mini Hackintoshes for a little bit. It was very fun. I learned so much from this. But the biggest thing I learned when I was doing this Hackintoshing is that macOS is fine. It's not great. It's not terrible. I was customizing the hell out of it, installing crazy desktop environments and shit. For the most part, it was fine. So I kept using Linux. I kept playing with my Linux machines. But then a very specific thing happened. I graduated high school and I had to go to college. As you guys see here, this is 2012. I graduated in 2013. So this will be the first set of bullet points. Was mostly Linux and PC in high school, which was 2009 to 2013. Started Hackintoshing in 2012. Still mained Linux, though. I was also still on Android this whole time, to be clear. I was a big Android fanboy, like would shame my friends for buying iPhones, was pissed when the iPhone 4 came to Verizon. I was very anti-Apple overall. So I should even specify that. Still very anti-Apple overall. So a series of things had to happen for my perspective to change. So 2013, graduation. I needed a laptop for college. And I wanted to really take college seriously. I grinded hard for this shit. I got into a dope school and I wanted to be able to be free, not spend all my time. Because I just spent most of my fucking high school time in my basement or out skateboarding and not doing much else. Like, yes, all of those photos before, those are all my basement. It was a refurnished basement, but it's a basement nonetheless. And I wanted to actually go out and not feel like I had to be tethered to a wall all the time. So I specifically needed a laptop with good battery life. So this was 2013. I need a laptop with decent battery. A very interesting thing happened in 2013. The 2013 MacBook Air. The 13-inch MacBook Air looks and feels just like last year's, but it runs for more than 12 hours. Do you know how nuts this was as a person rocking a Dell and an HP, both with GPUs in them, that had like bought a used ThinkPad? This was insane. The idea of a battery that could last you actually 12 hours was just unbelievable. And this laptop, even though I didn't like macOS much, I just needed hardware that would actually get me through college. So I bought this with the specific plan of installing Linux on it right when I got it. So that was my plan. Get the 2013 MacBook Air, install Linux on it, so I can have a portable computer running Linux with actual decent battery life, and then bring my super beefy desktop that I had built to college as well, and just leave it running plugged in all the time, and then SSH into it, remote into it, whatever I need to do when I needed a more powerful machine. That was my plan. Do you know what? That plan worked relatively well. So let's add that here. Got 2013 MacBook Air, planned to install Linux, or not even planned, I did install Linux. So I installed, what flavor of Linux did I install? I'm pretty sure I triple booted it. Fuck, what did I install? I'm pretty sure I was like a Fedora guy at the time. I'm almost positive it was Fedora, yeah. Because I wanted something real stable. Because again, I was being the like try hard, I'm taking this college thing seriously guy. And Fedora was the serious like Debian version. So I gave it a very real shot. People are asking in chat, why not Arch? Because it was a MacBook Air that had just been released. It had like just come out. And I was not dealing with getting Arch configured on a machine that nobody else had tried to install Arch on. I did not want to be first. I wanted to be stable. This was the first time in my life where I wanted my computer to stop being a problem. Because up until this point, I was constantly dealing with my configurations breaking, my computer not booting, especially my phone, by the way, because I was always running custom software on my phone. And like I reinstalled a new ROM and like would wipe my system data at least once a week at this time. So I was like notoriously hard to get a hold of. My shit was always broken. I could fix it, but it was always broken. And I really wanted to take things more seriously in college. So I did. And that's why I ended up with the MacBook. But I had a big realization. The big realization happened when I started coding on macOS. Well, it was OS X at the time. And the crazy thing that I realized when I was coding in OS X is I could use most of the same tools and have Photoshop run natively. You have no idea how big of a deal this was for me. This was years before Windows Subsystem for Linux was even a thought. This was at least 5 years before the Microsoft Hearts Linux thing. This was way back. So the idea of having an OS where I could actually write code using real Unix-based tools and also have real production creative software that I relied on and I loved to use. So I was as much a Photoshop nerd as I was a code nerd at the time. Having the ability to do both on the same machine at the same time in the same OS without any virtualization, it was a massive oh shit moment for me. But I did keep coding in that dual boot though. So I kept coding mostly in Fedora for 2 months. But then I needed to start using more complex debugging tools because I was in a data structures course, and the data structures course was brutal. It was in C++ and required us to use a bunch of debugging tools for memory stuff. And on Windows, the recommendation was dark memory, which was awful. On macOS, we could use Xcode. So believe it or not, Xcode was kind of goated for C++ at the time. I did not expect that, but I was regularly finding myself in Xcode just to figure out what was going on with memory in C++ because it was kind of useful for that and for debugging workflows. And eventually I caved and just used Sublime on OS X. I didn't love it though. I tried so hard to turn macOS into the crazy stuff I was doing in Linux. That all said, I wasn't coding much except for my classwork. This was college. So reminder, this was Frosh year of college. So I was like partying, going out, avoiding work to the best of my ability, barely participating in any of the open source stuff I used to do. Wasn't taking shit too seriously. But I did still host servers. Those were all still Linux. Generally speaking, for my first year of college, I did not spend much time customizing my tools unless I like literally had to. So I found myself defaulting to Mac more and more. Oh boy, people in chat remember in the data structures course. Did you take it with Barb? Cutler was insane. I planned to take college super seriously. I showed up with the intention of taking college super seriously, but then I was in college and that flew out the window very quickly once I was actually there. Yeah, I planned to, exactly. My goal was to take college seriously. Fuck yeah, you took it with Cutler. Yeah, the thing with Cutler is you hated her until you finished the class and you realized how much better a programmer you were by the end of it. So I have a lot of respect for Barb. She forced me to get good at coding much earlier than I would have otherwise. I also forgot to mention a fun detail, which is since I was hosting those Minecraft servers, I was using GNU Screen and Git to get to the servers and host and like manage the files and things. So I ended up being pretty good at GNU Screen and SSH, as well as Git before I even really started coding seriously, which ended up being a superpower, especially in college where I never had to worry about things being corrupted or like deleting the wrong file and shit while I was coding. It was a huge relief for me. So at this point, I'll say I was tolerant of Mac at this point. But a couple more things happened that slowly changed my tune more, including a swing back to Linux for a bit. But before we get there, we talk about an important thing that happened. So at the time, I was still largely running Android. And by largely, I mean entirely. I didn't find one of my Galaxy Nexus photos, but I went from the Droid to a Droid X I won in a skate contest. Yes, I won a Droid X in a skate contest. To the Galaxy Nexus, to the Nexus 4, to the HTC One M7 when it dropped on Verizon. So I was a bit of an Android fan, you could say. I was switching Android phones all the time, running custom firmware on them wherever I could. Was a big Android fanboy. And as you can see from how that looks, I also would customize the shit out of it. I probably should have found more photos of that, but I would rice the shit out of my Android stuff. I had so much fun custom styling my phone to make it look as cool as I could. But then something happened. iOS 7 happened. And this OS release fucked me up. I had never seen a mobile OS look this good before. I was spending so much time customizing my goddamn phone and couldn't make it look a tenth as good as this at the time. It was insane. Going from, remember what iOS 6 looked like with the super skeuomorphic, everything's trying to look really like the real world. The slide to unlock with the glimmery text. Oh, it was so cringe. And then iOS 7 was stunning. I had just never seen a mobile OS that looked designed before. It fucked me up. Having the like slide up with the quick actions thing, we were just starting to find patterns like this in Android, but holy shit, this was in 2013 actually groundbreaking. And I don't think that to this day, Apple, but specifically iOS 7, get the credit they deserve for changing the design language that we use for making applications fundamentally. Applications were no longer trying to look like their real world counterparts. They were trying much harder to be better than the real world counterpart. The example I usually give is the Books app. The Compass might be a better example. Yeah. So one of my favorite examples to show the difference between iOS 6 and 7 is the Compass. The Compass on the left has a specific goal. It's trying to convince you that you don't need a real compass anymore. The reason it's designed to look just like a compass is so that you can bring your familiarity with the real world object with you and feel confident this will work the same way. The one on the right is just trying to get you the information with as little brain overload as possible. I know nowadays we all feel nostalgic and we love the thing on the left, and there's absolutely design that takes the skeuomorphic stuff and makes it really modern and cool. But the idea of the app's design being much more focused on communicating the information and getting you an answer as quickly as possible, rather than trying to convince you this is good enough, where it really did feel like the old design language was convincing you it was good, and the new design language was just being good. And it fucked my brain up. I remember when this dropped, my girlfriend at the time had an iPhone and an iPad, and I really wanted to play with the beta, so I convinced her to install the iOS 7 beta on her iPad so I could just see it. And I was so blown away. And then another crazy thing happened. So we should go back to the notes. So iOS 7 broke my brain. And then I had a crazy stroke of luck. A friend gave me a fully functioning iPhone 5. And it wasn't just the base model, it was the max storage model. What had happened was she worked at a bog and she found it when she was working there. It was just in the water. So she assumed it was broken. She couldn't get it to turn on. And she sent it to me to fix with the opportunity to keep, because we were good friends. I'd helped her with some stuff in the past. It was a thank you type thing. And then I just got it. I cleaned it off a bunch, plugged it in to see what would happen. And it just turned on and worked fine. Literally a swamp phone. So I got a perfectly functioning iPhone 5 that happened to be perfect for me because it was also a Verizon phone. I was on Verizon at the time. So I started using it as a Wi-Fi only device with iOS 7, and I fell in love. I did not expect to be clear. I was the diehard Android guy that would make fun of their iPhone friends that then slowly fell in love with the iPhone. And then what I would do is I'd wait for new iPhones to drop, because the 5S was already out at this point. But then when the 6 dropped, I bought somebody's used 5S. It was great. I was able to constantly buy people's old phones and coast like that for a while, which was great. And iOS, unlike Android, rocking old iPhones was actually fine, which was also a new thing to me, because I was used to upgrading, as I mentioned, in a 3-year window. I went from Droid to Droid X to Galaxy Nexus to Nexus 4 to One M7. That's 6 phones in 3 years. And now I could actually just keep a phone for a while. And this made me fall in love with iOS. The fact that it worked reliably, that I had a phone that you could always contact. And obviously I still jailbroke it. I still hacked the shit out of it. I riced my iPhone a ton. But iOS 7 as a starting point was so good. And my phone was stable. I had an actual battery, which if you used Android phones back in the day, your battery life was talked about in hours with decimals. You would proudly say that your phone could last 4.5 hours. If you're not measuring your battery life in whole numbers, then you're not measuring a battery I want to use. And that was very much the case for Android at the time. So I fell in love with iOS and slowly started using macOS more. There's one more important detail, which is that I hated all of the ecosystem stuff. So the share between Mac and phone stuff. I hated all of it. I found it all just got in the way and never worked as expected. And to this day, I still strongly feel this way. I hate the AirPod handoff features. I hate the fact that when I have my phone too close to my watch and I go like this accidentally, because I'm just using my phone, it puts it in some crazy bump mode and starts going off a ton. There's just so many things that these devices do between each other that I fucking hate. And if they didn't do any of that, I would be happier with Apple stuff. So I turn off as much of it as I can. AirDrop is fine when you manually hit the button and use it, but all the automatic things are trash, fucking garbage, dumpster fire. Cannot recommend it. Ugh, not fond. But I did start using iMessage. I did move my SIM card over. I did start using iOS. But then we enter the next chapter, which is Theo gets an internship. Remember that thing I said earlier that I tried to take college really seriously and have a really legit setup? I tried even harder with my internship. So I planned to go super hard on internship. It was at Amazon in 2015. It would have been 16. Yeah, it would have been 2015. Yeah. So it was Amazon 2015. And the computer they gave me had 3 gigs of RAM, a 5400 RPM, 250 gigabyte hard drive, i5 from 3 years prior. It was awful. It was awful. It was actually embarrassing how trash the machine they gave us was. The spec for this machine would have been max 350, despite the fact that I think I made 30 to 40K in this internship. So what the fuck? Fucked me. Absolutely fucked me. They gave us the worst possible machine that they could even pretend to get away with. And I had that for the whole summer. So I didn't tolerate this. Also, should mention, ran a super bloated Windows 7 install. And this Windows 7 install had all their crazy enterprise shit on it too. So it barely ran. Thing took 6+ minutes to boot. I'm not exaggerating. It was literally like sometimes 10+ minutes to boot. And then it would fail sometimes when you signed in and you have to reboot it. Constantly had to do updates. Constantly fucking miserable to use. Was super restrictive for what you could install. And it was kind of known at the time that if you were using this computer, which all the interns had to, that you had to spend the first week or so at IT getting them to constantly approve the random things you had to install to do your dev work. But something else was going on at the time at Amazon. Something that saved my ass. Someone was making an official Ubuntu distro. I should add one more important detail, that this wasn't the only computer. We also had a pretty beefy desktop running Red Hat Enterprise. Let's do REL, Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So at my desk at the office, I had a decent desktop that I never, ever actually saw the display from. I would just remote into it always. That was meant to be your actual computer. RHEL, yes, thank you. Been a bit. Yeah, so Red Hat Enterprise Linux was on the desktop they provided us, but that instance was not even close to ready to run on anything other than a server. So I heard about this unofficial Ubuntu distro. I wanted a Mac though. I pestered and pushed because my whole team was on Macs except for one other dev. So I wanted to be on a Mac just so like I could have the same stack as the team. They could help me and shit. Like they didn't even like pairing with me because my computer was so awful to work with. So when we paired, I would have to use like their machines with them, which meant it was really hard to get unblocked. I was getting trapped fucking constantly underneath this shit Windows machine. So I did a few things. First thing I did was I ordered a decent SSD and more RAM. Actually, I didn't even order the RAM. I just ordered a decent SSD. I went to IT and demanded the Ubuntu image. And what happened is something that's happened a lot throughout my career. I ended up close with IT. The IT guy I was working with was so disgusted at the machine that I was given and was so pumped that I was nerdy enough to show up and rebuild the machine basically, that he signed off on basically everything, let me do the Ubuntu install, and also added a bunch of additional RAM. I think he gave me 8 gigs. So I ended up with 8 gigs of RAM, had a machine that was way beefier than all the other interns, had Ubuntu on it now, and then things turned up to 11. Remember how before I said I'm going to take this summer seriously? I did. I became a serious Linux nerd. I was already kind of into Linux, but this is when I like went deep on i3. This is when I went deep on Vim, not even NeoVim yet, just straight up fucking Vim. I got back into IRC again. At the time, Amazon wasn't using Slack. We were still an IRC company. So I had like the intern IRC that I spent way too much of my time in just shit posting with them, all in my terminal. Obviously, this is also when I got deeper into Tmux, which I fell in love with. Because up until that point, I was like a new screen guy and just for SSH mostly. So I was deep. I had so much fun with this. And by the end of the summer, I was not a very good developer. I had not improved much as a dev, but I gotten so good at Linux. I will also add that the mentor that I had for that internship was literally gone for the first 2 months. He was there the first 2 days and then took a vacation and came back my last month. So I had no mentorship or help at all. It was a fucking mess. Like actually comically bad. Let me know in the comments if I should do a dedicated video to the shit show that was my internship now that it's been over 10 years, almost 10 years, because holy fuck, that was a miserable experience. And I was largely just coping with the hardcore Linux stuff. Regardless, the point I'm trying to make here is I'd become like diehard Linux. I had like the 2015 version of the Primogen setup. I was like building custom keyboards and shit. I was trying out Ergotron type stuff. I was going crazy with my i3 setup, religiously keeping the right windows in the right places. I even refused to use Chrome and tried Firefox for everything, but begrudgingly so many internal things required Chrome that I gave up and did that. It was great. And I'll say straight up, Windows, especially on the computer they gave me, was not an option. And I did the best thing I could by moving that machine to Ubuntu. I'm actually proud of how well I worked around the shit show that Amazon handed me in terms of hardware. But man, I ended up just going down that rabbit hole because it was the only thing that was rewarding at the time. And since I had nobody helping me actually do the fucking job, and also, fun fact, the intern project they gave me was literally impossible. And their whole like plan for it that they wrote up for me was based on 3 false assumptions that were like the key points of it. So there was no way for me to have a rewarding time writing code. It was all exploratory, like looking through how other things worked that I didn't understand to try and explain to the team the project was impossible. So the only rewarding thing I did the whole summer was make friends with other interns and work on my Linux setup. Oh, one other thing I did that was actually important this summer. At this point, I hated Windows. I had spite for Windows. I was not fond. I had shipped my desktop out there because I'm a fucking moron and I wanted to be able to play games when I was done with like the intern stuff. So I had my desktop, my monitor, and all that shit. And Windows 10 happened. So I installed Windows 10 and I had feelings. To say the least, I had feelings. The big thing that pissed me off with Windows 10 was Bing. So I'll specify all this. Windows 10 dropped. Cortana happened. Bing happened. Windows 10 came with a search bar on the bottom left, and that search bar could only search Bing. I don't know about you guys, but not a big fan of Bing at the time. Not a big fan of Bing at all at the time. So I came up with an idea. I had played with Chrome extensions a bit in the past, and I knew we could do something with those. So I proposed to my friends from the internship, what if we made a Chrome extension that would redirect your Bing search to the search engine of your choice? And that's when I made Chrometana, my first viral project. That has a shit rating here because this project was so popular that my Google account was getting attacked and compromised fucking constantly. To this day, more people are trying to get into my Google account for access to my Chrome extension that has a lot of users than are trying to get into my Google account to get to my YouTube channel, which is kind of insane. But yes, I made Chrometana. This is my first big project. Actually, what's the timeline? It was either this or InSquare for Pebble. These were the first like big-ish open source things that I made. This was a watch face I made for the Pebble smartwatch. I think, this would have been... this was before. Yeah, so I guess my first thing was my smartwatch stuff with InSquare. And then during my internship, I made Chrometana. And I'll be honest, all the hard code for this, I did not do. I was mostly like connecting the parts with the Chrome extension. A friend of mine, Mayan, she did the UI for it. And another friend of mine, Claire, who ended up getting my job at Twitch, she did the regex for it, which was by far the hardest part. So this project put me on the map. It was my first big open source thing. I ended up getting like interview requests from Wall Street Journal and shit about it while I was interning at Amazon. And it very much distracted me. I was paying even less attention. To be fair, there was nothing I could actually be doing at that point, but I was deep down the Chrometana rabbit hole. That was the focus at the time. And then when I went back to college, that was my like open source project I was doing in the open source program at my school and shit. It was a whole thing. Great time. Anyways, Chrometana blew up. And I honestly don't think I would have made Chrometana if it wasn't for how much I was pissed at Windows at the time, because I was so mad about this Windows machine I was rocking and the move over to Linux and how much better it was. This was all largely like a middle finger to Windows. And it went great. But then the internship ended, went back to college, reality started to kick in. At that point, when I went back to college, I guess this is the next chapter, back to college. At this point, I was clearing out my remaining coursework. So just finishing missing credits. Very little of which was code. Most of the stuff I was doing was just filling out necessary credits for RPI. So I ended up dueling in music and getting my music degree because I had so much credit to fill and not coding a whole lot, mostly just maintaining those projects. I tried to get into window managers for macOS because I wanted to keep using my MacBook Air. And I didn't like the ThinkPad I bought because the battery was so shit. So I was still on the Mac, but tried to make it more Linuxy. Specifically, I think I tried, was it Amethyst? Which I was using as an attempt to do window management similar to like Xmonad and i3 that I loved from Linux on Mac. And it was rough. It was not good enough. But I was admittedly not coding much, so kind of just coasted, avoided thinking about code too much. Was really deep in my music hole and like enjoying my last year of college. But then the important chapter. The job at Twitch. Oh man, this job. And most people think of my journey from Linux to Mac that know anything. This is the part that they think of. Because I showed up at this job, Mac user who prefers Linux. I did not want to be a Mac guy, but it was just what I was using, especially because like I wanted Photoshop and I wanted code and I wanted a battery. And that combination did not really exist anywhere else, and arguably still to this day barely exists anywhere else. So this was my setup. But then my manager broke me. Wabo was one of the best engineers I've ever seen. At the time, without question, the best engineer I'd ever actually see work. And the way he worked broke my brain. I was under the impression that all the best engineers hitting all the crazy hotkeys, swapping between things faster than they can even think, making shit happen, coming out of their keyboard as fast as possible, not using a mouse because those are for noobs. That was what I thought a fast developer was. That was not how Waba coded. The way Waba coded was he would plug his laptop in with the single display port cable for his OG cinema display. The Thunderbolt display. He was obsessed with this because it was one cable to plug in his laptop and immediately get to work. He had a keyboard, a mouse, and a trackpad all at his desk. He would just push them aside, sit his laptop down, open the screen up barely, just having his hands underneath it, plugged directly in to this display. And he wouldn't use any window management, anything. Every app he had was full screen, and he would just command tab between them. So he'd have his browser up, full screen. He'd command tab to his code a bit, command tab back, see if it worked or not, command back to his code, maybe command back to his terminal for a sec to see if things changed there. Big stock terminal guy, by the way, did like no customization at all. But the way that dude could think about, describe, and deliver code blew me away. And what I learned as I watched him was defaults are powerful. The biggest power that comes from defaults is that you stop thinking about the details, which to many, especially us deep engineers, kind of sounds horrible. Like, we love having control of our setups in our environment. Some of my best performing videos are the ones that I did about the crazy sets of tools I'm using. My stack has so many parts. Like, we love playing with, trying out, and experimenting with different tools and technologies. But when you pick a default and you decide to not do that, then all you're focused on at that point is delivering. It's the same reason something like Laravel is great. It's the same reason something like Adonis is great. It's the same reason something like the Mern stack or the T3 stack is great to an extent too. If you don't have the ability or the decision to think about these things, you can focus on the actual value. This is also why shit like Prettier is so good. And it's why I don't use a Prettier config, because I don't want to get into arguments and waste time and brain power thinking about things like code formatting. Thinking about how much actual engineering time has been lost to disputes about code formatting makes me feel sick now. At the time, it's what I lived for. I loved critiquing like where you put your new lines and how you broke up your functions and your environment on your computer and insisting on jailbreaking so you could have a nice looking phone and all these types of things. Like, I customized everything for the sake of it. And when I saw somebody who I aspired to be as productive as that avoided configuration to the best of their ability, it melted me. And to this day, I try to channel that energy with the things I do that are work. So this computer, I do have one window management thing. I have rectangles. I like the hotkeys to quickly do things like that, but mostly the full screen hotkey, which is the one I use the most by a lot. I like the key bindings I have custom on my Mac right now, which is I have caps lock, and it's not Vim bindings, but it's close. I have IJKL as up, down, left, right, which is actually very nice to not have to leave home row to arrow through things. But I also have U and O as page up and page down, which I love. I bound all of those through Carabiner, which is a phenomenal piece of software. Carabiner Elements, so good. I've contributed some default key bindings to it too. If you go to the complex modifiers, add predefined rule, the Poker 3 bindings in there are by me because I wanted my left control up, down, and left control IJKL, and then I rebind caps lock to left control. And I kind of need those at this point. It's very hard for me to live without it. I just love it. And I don't touch my arrow keys ever. I'm a 60%er. If I could just remove the arrow keys off my keyboard, I'd probably be happier. I don't touch them. I just use home row. So yeah, defaults are powerful. I try to minimize how much I customize. And I found quickly, first off, Mac has the best defaults. macOS is the most usable OS right from when it's installed by a lot. The amount I have to change Windows or Linux of any flavor to get it to a point where I'm kind of happy is kind of insane. macOS is much closer. Still not quite there. I still want to turn off the animation speeds. I still hate things like I don't use any of the, mission control stuff. I hate it all. Just feels like multitasking, but slower and worse. For the most part, I just use my Mac stock, and I slowly fell in love with it. I never really loved macOS until this point. I tolerated macOS up until this point, but here is where I started to fall in love. The fact that I had a machine that I could just go to an Apple store, buy, leave it in mostly defaults, change a few things here and there, and be productive as fuck. Oh, it entirely changed how I work and how I think, not just like about the code I'm writing on the machine I'm writing it on, but the way I structure projects, the way I make decisions. Not making a decision is more powerful than making a decision a lot of the time because it saves you the brain power and energy from having to worry about these things. And I see this a lot with Linux, and it's the main reason I've like backed off, because I don't want to do what I did during this internship again, where I spent 3 months just going crazy, customizing everything. It was very fun. I had a lot of fun doing this, but it wasn't productive. And if I wanted to have fun, I could go play around with my music setup or go skateboard and change how my board worked. I did not need my code and my job to be the thing I was constantly customizing and configuring. And to this day, I try to minimize how much I change at once. Like right now, I'm trying a new terminal, Alacrity, but I'm still using Tmux. So it basically feels exactly the same. I've tried other editors, but usually just for a few days and only if they have enough support for the tools I already like, and then end up back at VS Code like every time. I have the things I like to use, and it's rare I actually change them. Like another one recently, I love Tig. Tig is great. It's a really quick way to like look at a Git history and grab things, and I love it. But I'm trying Lazy Git right now, and it's very different, but also very cool. But I don't know if I'll stick with it or not, because for me, it is just another thing. But do I still use Windows? That is a great question, chat. I do. In fact, I'm recording this on Windows right now. Whenever I'm streaming, I don't trust OBS on Mac still. I only really trust OBS, which is Open Broadcast Suite. It's the main software people use for content creation, especially if they're using a computer like this for screen capture and stuff. OBS on an Intel PC running Windows is still the most stable experience by a lot. So I have 2 capture cards routing all my stuff to my PC, and I still use Windows for that. I actually also use Windows on my couch as my like TV OS, because I fucking hate all of the television operating systems so much. So yeah, I do use Windows quite a bit, and also for gaming, but I am mostly a Mac guy now. And it's weird. I missed the Wayland move. Like, Wayland happened, and I was just not there for it. And it's weird, because I was waiting so long for Wayland, and I just didn't get to be there for it. I was there for GNOME 3. GNOME 3 was a fun move. I was actually a GNOME 3 defender, fun fact, back in the day. I needed a computer that didn't make me feel like I was taking care of it. And moving to Mac for real, and committing to Mac for real, and no longer dual booting and doing all this other shit, just using it entirely changed the way I write software, the way I think about software, and the way my brain is wired to make decisions. I'm not saying customization is bad. In fact, it's phenomenal. If I didn't spend that summer going deep on my crazy Linux config, then I would have constantly felt like I was inferior for not doing it. But I think I had to. I think my journey had to be this like multi-part thing where I started as anti-Mac. I got into hackintoshing. I begrudgingly used a Mac for a bit, specifically for college. I went all in on Linux for a summer and then realized the best dev I knew used Mac stock. And I don't think I would have ended up where I am now anywhere near as concisely if I didn't have this journey there. And if I didn't go through all of these phases, if I didn't start building my own computers and hackintoshing, if I didn't have to buy a Mac because there was no PC with an actual fucking battery at the time, if I didn't have the summer of Linux, and if I didn't see my boss being an absolute god using everything stock, if I didn't have these steps, I don't think I would have ended up here. And even if I did, it would have taken so much longer. This needs a midwit meme. Use the defaults, customize everything, use the defaults. Yep, absolutely. And that's how I felt. I feel like I started on the left with defaults are fine, that's why I use Windows. The middle, no, but macOS is okay, but if you're not customizing everything, you're not a real developer, you're not a real computer person. Come on, you know better. You were ROMing your own Android phones. And then part 3, the end is defaults are fine, that's why I use Mac. So that was my journey. It was a great time. Shout outs to John Waba, my manager who got me to take Mac more seriously and take things a bit simpler. For Joni Ive, for redesigning iOS to make me give a fuck about Apple's design language and systems and recognizing that they were better than what I could do. And to Tim Cook, for running Apple so much better than Steve Jobs ever could and not making me feel bad for being or not being an Apple user, which gave me the right amount of wiggle room to give him an actual shot. I don't think I ever would have moved to Apple if it wasn't for Tim Cook. I don't think I ever would have if it wasn't for Joni Ive. I don't think I ever would have been as fond as I am of my Mac if it wasn't for Waba showing me so early what it meant to be a fucking productive developer. Yeah. Single monitor for life. Work with what works for you. Have fun with your customization, but don't hesitate to let things be simple if that works for you too. Until next time, peace nerds.